Hey, everybody. This is Ann Jersick. I'm the Director of Outreach and Advocacy for the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. We could not be happier that you're with us this afternoon. I think we've got an excellent presentation. Last week, I was fortunate enough to be up at the the Chesapeake Tree Canopy Summit in Patuxent, and boy, it was amazing to me the number of presentations on the connections between tree canopy and public health. It's really an exploding field right now. The number of papers that have come out is, through the roof. It's a steep hockey stick. But we're fortunate that we've got someone in our backyard here in Richmond with Dr. Jeremy Hoffman, who has, I think, pioneered some of this research. So we're thrilled that he's able to join us today. Dr. Hoffman is the chief scientist at the Science Museum of Virginia. Looking forward to seeing his slides. I will just mention that in order to ask a question, all you have to do is, everybody's on mute right now, but in order to ask a question, all you have to do is hover, and you'll see on your screen a little Q&A sign. And if you do that, I can moderate those questions. I'll see them as they pop up. If it looks like something that I know Dr. Hoffman's going to cover later in this presentation, I won't interrupt his flow. But otherwise, we'll ask him sort of as they come along. We'll just have to play it by ear. So, Dr. Hoffman, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Ann. And thanks, everybody, for being interested in this topic. I think I recognize a few of the names on the participants list. We have some new things to share near the end of the presentation, but I'm so excited to hear that you're interested in this. I like using the word throwing shade a lot because I think it's an appropriate way to describe increasing tree canopy. And I think that, excuse me, just drank some coffee, that expanding tree canopy is actually beneficial in multiple ways, as many of you know. And we're going to go over just like some of the interesting things that we found out here in Richmond that's generally applicable across just about every city that we've then kind of followed up in. So I want to recognize that a lot of this work is based on collaborations with a lot of amazing people, and I have absolutely not done this entirely alone. And it's actually included a lot of work from even some students from Virginia Commonwealth University most recently. So let's dive right in. The National Climate Assessment, two most important chapters for us in the Chesapeake Bay watershed are the Southeast and the Northeast. I really wish in future climate assessments they might single out the Mid-Atlantic because we have such a gradient across our landscape that you can see apparent in a lot of the different information presented in these two chapters. If you haven't had a chance to read them, please do, but I can summarize the findings of those two chapters in basically 5 emojis. The Virginia and more broadly the Mid-Atlantic need to be preparing for a hotter, wetter, sneezier, and wheezier climate. What do I mean by that? Well, hotter we'll get to in a little bit with rising heat waves, their occurrence, their length, their intensity. The wetter in the sense of both the precipitation in the extremity of those precipitation events, but also being inundated slowly from the East Coast due to some of the highest rates of sea level rise in North America. And then sneezier and wheezier in the sense that our air quality might suffer either through the earlier arrival and longer lasting allergy seasons due to earlier springs and later falls. And then wheezier in the sense of, potentially depending on how we manage emissions from various sources, the impact on our localized air quality that depends heavily on urban design and traffic loads. So let's focus now on what I mean by a hotter Mid-Atlantic. In 50 of the largest U.S. cities, 2015, Dana Habib was able to show that heat wave frequency, duration, season, and intensity over the last several decades here. Every bar graph, or every bar represents a decade, with the 2000s being the most recent included in this paper. But I imagine that the same trend would only continue if you now included the 2010s. Needless to say, that heat wave characteristics across all of these 50 cities are showing a lengthening, strengthening, and intensifying heat wave season. That's worrisome because the extreme heat is the leading cause of weather-related fatalities in the country over the last 30 or so years, even more so than deaths attributed to things that we regularly hear about on the news, like flooding, tornado, and hurricanes. So what does that mean more locally? I've worked with the Virginia Department of Health to investigate how we react to extreme heat in Virginia. Up on this graph is going to be more heat-related illness visits at 2 emergency departments and urgent care centers. And then along the bottom here is the apparent temperature, or the heat index, at the Richmond International Airport, which is our station of record locally. Perhaps unsurprisingly, you can imagine what this graph looks like before I even reveal it. And that as it gets hotter, more and more people get sick for heat-related illnesses. This includes definitions for ICD-9 and 10 codes established by the CSTE. Those are details that aren't particularly necessary for this conversation. As it gets hotter, we get sick, and more people get sick. In fact, in 2019, in just the month of July alone, more than 1,000 Virginians sought emergency care for heat-related illnesses, underscoring the importance of this stressor on our public health. But we know that extreme heat isn't consistent across urban environments. And this picture, I think, does a really good job of showing us just a microcosm of what a lot of our cities look like. Lots of parking. Everybody loves parking. Impervious surfaces. And then maybe, disparate urban canopy, both old trees like the big oak in the top left corner. But also there are, people have lawns, this non-native European grasses. And then some people have gotten really interested recently in native plants, like this Bayscapes garden here that's surrounded by this walking path just across the street. And so we can learn a lot from this picture about how heat might be disparately impacting different areas of cities differently. So I'm going to show you a thermal image. Usually I would do a call and response, which is super fun, and you're missing out on my call and response, but I'll just reveal it all the same. So taking an image with a thermal camera, we can see how temperatures vary across an urban environment. And this is their surface, not necessarily the overlying air temperature, but nonetheless indicative of the kinds of materials that we build our habitats out of. So interesting differences here emerge. Definitely the coolest place is underneath this big mature oak tree. Of course, shade. The warmest place is in the expansive parking lots. A difference of about 100 degrees Fahrenheit to the touch between those two surfaces. At the same time, the non-native European grasses, which are suffering from a late summer drought, are significantly warmer than the native plants in our Bayscapes garden. And more importantly, those non-native European grasses are actually as hot as the sidewalk around them. Then we can learn a lot about color. The black paving and walking materials significantly hotter than the sidewalk. And then these white benches here and white stone, I think not entirely sure exactly what material it's made out of, but is very reflective and remains cool even in the midsummer sun. And then you can see here different cars have different temperature signatures coming back to the thermal sensor as well, which is also interesting. I could talk about this one picture for probably an hour, and my geography students will tell you that I probably have. But in the meantime, let's zoom out now. If you think about the balance, really it comes down to the balance between these natural features of our landscape, like shade, trees, and native plants, to the human environment, like things like paving and asphalt, it really determines then the temperature of a place in many ways. Go backwards and up like you're on Google Maps. Zoom out in your mind to hover above the city of Richmond and any city that you might be involved with intimately. And you might recognize that most of our cities have a distinct imbalance between those natural and human landscapes. We've known about this phenomenon for well over 100 years. And we've established the name called urban heat islands, whereby human environments absorb more of the sun's energy throughout the day and then re-emit it back into the air as heat throughout the afternoon and into the evening. I'm showing you a map here of the United States of urban heat islands. You can see many of the major urban corridors in the Northeast are connected by urban archipelagos of urban heat, places like Chicago, some of the most well-studied urban heat islands in the country pop out quite significantly in a map like this one. So it's a pretty ubiquitous feature of the human landscape in our country. And I hope that by showing you that heat is probably disproportionately concentrated in areas within US cities, I hope I've inspired you to think about wanting to act on it. So one of my colleagues, and my primary colleague on this work, is Vivek Chandas. He's a professor of urban planning at the Portland State University in Portland, Oregon. And about 10 years ago, he picked up some foundational work that was published in the early 2000s, working on these drive-arounds in cities to map their urban heat, whereby he sticks this kind of car flag of science out of the passenger side doors of cars. That's sending a signal into the car where a data logger is recording temperature every single second, and a GPS unit is recording where he is and his teams are every single second. This, when you multiply it by 12, 15 cars in an urban environment, you can cover a lot of ground and retrieve very highly descriptive maps of how temperatures vary at certain times during the day. And so I had him come to Richmond in 2017 to do one of his campaigns. The way we wanted to do it differently, though, in Richmond was to include organizations that were already interested in climate action to begin with. So the city of Richmond has an RVA Green 2050 plan, which is a equity-focused climate action plan for the city of Richmond. I want to introduce you to Elisha and Brienne, the two main drivers of this work at the city of Richmond. They've been really foundational to advancing this work beyond 2017. Even including this work now as one of the centerpieces of their discussion of climate action in the city of Richmond. And then on the flip side of the city, we had Groundwork RVA, which is a green workforce skills development nonprofit for Richmond Public Schools teens. Groundwork RVA is part of the broader Groundwork USA network that have active groups all over the country. But Groundwork RVA is unique in that they purposefully recruit teens from limited resource communities of color in the city of Richmond, which made them a very natural partner for this work, given their desire to green Richmond, prepare youth for success, improve health and quality of life for everyone, and realize racial equity. I want to just show you the kinds of people that work there. Rob Jones is the present executive director. Before, we were working with Giles Harnsberger, who now works for the City of Richmond Parks Department. Melissa Guevara, who's their program manager, and Kendra Norrell, who has now moved on to work at VCU Sustainability, but they're all wonderful people. And I just wanted to highlight those folks that I've been working with, because you can see that predominantly most of this work in the city of Richmond is being forwarded by very strong females and people of color. And I think it's really, really important to recognize that as I talk more about our findings from this point forward. So we went out during a heat wave in Richmond, July 13th, 2017. We had help from this young woman, Jonna James, in mapping some of the temperatures across Richmond. Here she is affixing the science the car flag of science to measure urban temperatures. We had volunteers of all ages and backgrounds. We had students from U of R, VCU, faculty from both universities. We had a doctor who was at the time working for Bon Secours Health System in their caravan, which serves people without health insurance. The Richmond Times-Dispatch sent John Boyer, their meteorologist. So we were really well representative of the kinds of organizations that are active in this space in the city of Richmond. What did we find? Well, we found a 16-degree difference between the warmest and coolest place at the same time on the same day, during 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. hour. Hottest part of the day. It's also when we see the highest amount of people getting sick due to heat. So this is very representative of what a heat wave looks like in the city of Richmond. In the resilience world, or how we might talk about this in the kind of resilience lexicon, is that this is exposure. This is people actually experiencing extreme heat. Then when we compare these results to other things like people's sensitivity, are they able to find ways to limit their exposure? This is a map of the tree canopy in Richmond. If you remember that picture I showed you, this is probably no surprise in that the areas that were much hotter have very severely limited urban canopies. And there's a huge difference within a couple miles. The availability of tree canopy. The kind of opposite of this is, of course, then the built environment, the concentration of impervious surfaces. Here averaged into census block groups from the American Community Survey. And those two things, the exposure and the sensitivity, work to limit some individuals' resilience to extreme heat. But perhaps the most important detail, and really the important thing to this conversation, is the adaptive capacity of those people to be able to adapt reflexively to changing heat extremes. This is the color of money map of the city of Richmond. The yellow areas are areas of concentrated poverty in the city of Richmond. And the darker greens are areas with very limited poverty conditions. So you can see how those three environmental conditions correlate very strongly to poverty. This is something that's been established for a long time in the social science literature, and part of the ongoing conversation here in Richmond, where we recognize that certain populations and communities in our city are disproportionately impacted by the stressors and shocks of climate change. By just adding these four variables together, this is a vulnerability index that was rudimentarily put together by our group in conversations following the Heat Island study. We basically just feature scaled these different variables from 0 to 1, and then added them linearly to produce this urban heat vulnerability map. This is now not in prep. I'm excited to say that we are now have this published it'll be in March 2020. That's very exciting. But the darker red areas are kind of like those hotspots of vulnerability. And I actually had a really good conversation with a local policymaker, in that they were like, well, can you prove to me that these are really more vulnerable areas? That's interesting that you put together these numbers, but we need something that directly reflects kind of the community experience of these places. And so that made me go back to my colleagues at the Richmond or the Department of Health, and we connected with the Richmond Ambulance Authority, and we had them map out, the Richmond Ambulance Authority, we had them map out where they go to the most for heat-related illnesses in the city of Richmond over the last 5 years. So I'm going to reveal a map that will show only places that the ambulance has responded to a call for a heat-related illness over the last several years. The correspondence between our heat vulnerability map and this map of areas of relatively higher responses for heat-related illnesses is quite stunning. We even capture some of the more limited, features of this. And even when we correct this ambulance response map for population density, the patterns that emerge still remain. And when we look at zip code level data of these same features, the 4 hottest zip codes have the 4 highest rates of ambulance responses and admissions for heat-related illnesses. So I'm fairly convinced that this is a true thing, and we're working again on publishing that and expanding our understanding with the Virginia Office of Emergency Management Services. Jessica Rosner is a MPH there, helping me understand more about the nuances of these data. I think I don't know what I'm seeing, if someone has a question. Can everybody hear me, or is it just Gabby that has the sound issue? Can everybody hear me still?
Dr. Hoffman, I can still hear you. Gabby said hers just cut out. So,
okay. Well, hopefully.
Hopefully everybody else can still hear.
Wonderful. Well, if anybody else has an issue, I hope Gabby is able to hear. Okay, people are saying they can hear. Wonderful. Well, I'm sorry, Gabby. And certainly if it doesn't work out, we can, figure out how you can access these slides after the fact. But I want to tell you like a deeper story that's emerged and we just had published last week. You might have heard about it on NPR or somewhere in other publications. People are still catching on to it. But we looked at the historical housing policy of redlining. So in the top left here, I have a image of Richmond's Homeowners Loan Corporation map. And what these different grade designations, A, B, C, and D, related to this housing assessor's description of a neighborhood and its perceived safety for investment. And that investment came in the form of like access to credit or home loans or home insurance. And we started to recognize that, wow, this HLC map kind of seems like maps of land surface temperature and urban heat. So we analyzed just taking those. And one more detail about the redlining maps. A lot of the times, especially in the Southeast, redlining maps were basically drawn. Those D areas are what were called those redlined areas, were predominantly communities of color. And in the present day, many studies have linked these historical housing practices to like chronically low homeownership, low credit scores, lower educational attainment, higher exposure to poor air quality. Also, they remain lower income communities of color to this day. So it seems like this practice of redlining basically codified entire areas of cities. Over 230 cities were redlined, basically codified these areas to be lower income communities of color almost 100 years later. And what we became interested in is investigating, well, does this also mean that they're disproportionately exposed to climate stressors like extreme heat? So what we've done is to average the land surface temperatures for every city that was redlined in the United States, and assess their land surface temperatures in relation to all the other grades within that same city. So basically what we're looking at is if an individual redlined area is relatively hotter or warmer, or warmer or cooler than the citywide average. And what's astonishing and comes out of this kind of treatment of the data is that in here in Richmond in D, the panel to the right, is that progressively the D-rated areas are warmer than every other rating. This seems to be mirrored then in their tree canopy, and this the third panel down in the map view is their concentration of tree canopy, where the A-rated areas, the non-redlined areas, have progressively higher tree canopy percentages. And then on the flip side of that, the impervious surfaces, they're more impervious than their non-redlined neighbors. So it's truly this association holds in 94% of the cities that were redlined. And it seems to be this systemic issue related to access to tree canopy and a relative preponderance of impervious surfaces. This is probably related to it maybe not so much created the disparity that we see today, this redlining practice, but it most certainly codified it, in that these populations were not able to move freely, have upward mobility, to move out of these redlined areas. And so you'll see our paper, if you just search Hoffman et al. 2020 climate, you'll have access. But the NPR article came out last week from Meg Anderson, and I guess it played on a couple different reports on the radio, and I'm happy to put up a link to that later. I didn't import it here, but we'll keep moving at this point. Just to say that it's a clear equity issue across the United States, not just Richmond. We've been really pleased to see that this work has been incorporated into decision making. The Richmond Land Bank has been using it as an indicator of community health. That's played a big role in the Richmond 300 comprehensive plan for the Planning and Development Review Department of the City of Richmond, as well as the RVA Green 2050 plan. We've since gone to a bunch of other cities to do this work. We were in Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, Maryland in 2018. And then Boston as just another example of a city that did it in 2019. I'll show you a little bit of their outcomes through time. The Baltimore Tree Trust has been heavily involved in using the heat island map that was generated from Baltimore to address where they were going to focus their tree canopy efforts. So now they have been focusing their attention on tree canopy projects in East Baltimore, which is one of the highest or hottest blocks in Baltimore. We got some great coverage from Scott Dance at the Baltimore Sun. He just covered our paper from last week as well as a follow-up. In DC, our map of Washington, DC was featured in National Geographic in August 2019. Some of the features that are consistent are that the urban cores, areas that necessarily have higher buildings, like here in Shaw, where you have relatively taller buildings actually create shade canyons in these areas. You can see a lot of hot air concentrated here in the mall around the White House and U.S. Capitol. I'm just kidding, but there really is. But then there's, the green spaces around the DC area, like Rock Creek Park, tend to be those heavily shaded areas and thereby the coolest. This has been used, the Washington, D.C. Department of, or their resilience group has been using it to frame some of their discussion about the built environment and resilience in the city of, or in the District of Columbia. There's that image from the Washington, or from Washington's map in the National Geographic. And I'll just tell you about the most Boston thing ever. They hosted their campaign and called it Wicked Hot Boston. They had over 50 volunteers basically recreate our campaign from Richmond, but for the city of Boston, including Brookline, Cambridge. They found similar aspects to what we found in other cities, 3 to 4 p.m., something like a 16-degree difference between the coolest and warmest place. Here in actual downtown Boston, the height of the buildings creating these shade canyons that actually cool the air. It's the areas that are more spaced out and like low slung, hard surfaces, all one or two story buildings are really what amplify temperatures. And then the tree canopied densely, the dense canopied area parks are definitely the coolest areas. That's refreshing. But what they've been able to do is to engage more of their community in decisions about extreme heat. So they do this really amazing thing called the Science Center Public Forum, where they've actually incorporated some of these findings into a participatory engagement experience for people from the city. They invite both nonprofits and practitioners and public to deliberate about potential solutions and resilience plans for the city in relation to extreme heat. We've now partnered with them to try and develop one specific to Richmond that we're hoping to get funded through the National Oceanic Administration's Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's upcoming grant proposal solicitation that's active right now. Tell you just a little bit more about some of the cool stuff. I can't help but brag about Throwing Shade in RVA, which is an ongoing collaboration we have with Groundwork RVA to engage students in a environmental justice curriculum around extreme urban heat, where they get to design a solution for themselves after playing around with these hands-on urban heat island and urban rain island kits, because surprise, urban areas don't just give rise to heat islands, they also generate their own rain islands during summertime precipitation events. So by designing solutions to these different stressors, they then go out and take a small grant and implement something like a rain garden or planting trees. In the first Throwing Shade program, they planted fruit trees to increase shade and food access in one of their neighborhoods. This collaboration is now being considered for a Metropolitan Business League Partnership Innovator Award, and the results of what I'm going to show you right now is being published in the Journal of Museum Education in March. And so before the Throwing Shade program, we asked them, what is an urban heat island? This is what they said, IDK, or I don't know, for those of us who are not up on the slang, was the most popular answer. After the Throwing Shade program, there was a 68% increase in their syllabic content. So they actually expanded their ability to talk about it in larger words. Their vocabulary got larger, and they used over double the amount of unique words. So what that tells me is that the students actually generated their own meaning about the program through time, and you can see that in the words that they were using. Some kids found more of a content connection through the physics. Some of them found more of it through the parks. Some of them found it more through the health impacts. Some of them found it more of an impact through their neighborhood. So I think that this is such an incredible way to expand teen engagement in climate action, get them actually involved in building resilience to a stressor that they themselves experience. To kind of wrap things up here, and be able to have a conversation a little bit more about our finding. Well, so we have a star here in just one. That's where they planted the shade trees. I guess I could update this with a couple more stars, but as you can see, we have a lot more work to do. To bring this back home to the Science Museum of Virginia, where I get to have the privilege of working every single day. Here's with the blue dome, former train station. We are completely and totally landlocked by nearly 100% impervious surfaces. You can see some little green spots here and there. But we, through the last few years, have decided to really put capital money where our climate mouth is. And so this whole parking lot that I showed you before, once we have to replace the parking that we're going to build a parking deck to accommodate our visitors from locally and regionally. But then we're going to turn this entire front space into a civic green space that makes use of the best practices in stormwater management, as well as air quality improvements and heat reduction, both in the reflectivity of the surfaces that we're going to replace and imperviousness of any of the surfaces that we put into this park. But this is going to be a major facelift to West Broad Street, one that'll be the only civic green space within a 10-second walk of a public transit line, as well as one of the only civic green spaces this large in this part of the city. And we all know, why this is important. I think that by changing these impervious surfaces that increase air temperature and potentially detrimentally impact air quality, but most certainly increase the volume and speed of surface runoff that brings, pollutants into the James River. By replacing those with pervious surfaces, we can actually improve air temperatures and decrease the volume and speed of surface runoff, and decrease the amount of pollutants that are going into the James River through our combined sewer system. So, trees are one are one great way of doing this, but we also have many practices that we can be employing through time. So I think, but what, this is all kind of scientific and heady in that I think it really just comes back down to our experience as well. We have some money through UVA. Jenny Rowe at the University of Virginia and I got some money to investigate how people experience these different landscapes, not just their total environmental health, but how do then does that reflect back on the human experience? So people are wearing heat sensors, air quality sensors, heart rate monitors, and potentially even like mobile EKG units to understand how these environments like the one on the left, which we know amplify air temperature, expose people disproportionately to like car emission pollutants to the air, and funnel stormwater and into our already aging infrastructure, versus a landscape more like the right. And how do we start to develop policies that center the human experience in these different landscapes, as well as their environmental benefits more broadly? So that's what I wanted to tell you today. If you want to learn more about the Heat Watch program, which is kind of the what our Heat Island assessments have developed into over time, capastrategies.com. I'm not affiliated directly with this company, but that is a LLC that is spun off of Vivek Chandas's work. You can email me at the Science Museum or follow me on Twitter or Instagram at jer_science. And certainly I would love to hear about what your reactions to this work are and how it might be useful for your own purposes in the Chesapeake Bay.
Thank you, Dr. Hoffman. So I'm going to launch a poll right now. Let's just see who's still out there. Just a quick question to ask you how familiar you are with the connection between heat-related illness and the percentage tree canopy in urban areas.
Hosts and panelists can't vote.
That's right.
I wouldn't want to bias the findings.
So while folks are filling that out real quick, just to sort of tie this back to what the Bay Foundation is working on right now, there are a handful of bills this year that are coming before our General Assembly that legislators are hearing about. So far, I'd say we're in pretty good shape. The bills that we're watching, if you want to jot these down real quick, it's House Bill 221, and its Senate companion is Senate Bill 184, and then House Bill 520. And both of these bills are, all of these bills are designed to try to preserve existing trees because, as we've clearly got an issue with as we develop more areas, sometimes developers tend to take out more trees than they necessarily need to. And there's also Delegate Bulliva's bill is designed to evaluate the stormwater nutrient reductions that can be taken if a developer keeps trees on a lot and or replaces more than the developer is currently required to by statute. So that we feel like that's a really important bill. That's a HB 520. As I said, all of these bills went through their subcommittees this week and are probably going to be heard in the full House this week. And Senator Locke's bill also passed out of the Senate Ag yesterday. So I think this is good news for Virginia, but there are a handful of other tree bills that we've not taken positions on yet. But if you're interested in this, I would encourage you. I think everybody's got my email address because that's how you got the invitation to this. And I would just encourage you to shoot me an email. I'm happy to put you in touch with the committee members that are going to be making the decisions on whether or not these bills advance or not. Again, they're all designed to help the state achieve its tree canopy goals. We're supposed to, according to the 2014 Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement, the Commonwealth is supposed to add 480 acres of tree canopy coverage in Virginia. We're not doing great towards that number right now. So I'd encourage, but clearly there's a direct connection between the amount of trees that we've got in our urban forest and the amount of stormwater that we've got going down the storm drain.
Yeah, and I think that the case can be made, like, you know, really holistically through this work as well. If any of you live in, you know, like Lynchburg or the Hampton Roads area, you know, somewhere, or I guess what was the other, Roanoke, all of those areas also received redlining maps, and so they exhibit very similar tendencies to Richmond. So if you'd like, I can help, you know, get those data to you, and those are very powerful cases for, you know, particular city scale projects. But you know, I think definitely, you know, the case can be made that stormwater certainly is like first and foremost. I think it's a great way to make the case, but there's also these cascading impacts to air quality and human health and equity that can be made as well.
Absolutely.
And sorry,
that's a great way for us to engage additional audiences that aren't generally at the table for some of the conservation conversations.
Yeah, no.
I was just going to encourage people, if you've got questions for Dr. Hoffman, all you have to do is hover at the bottom of the slide. There's a little Q&A box there, and you can type your questions if you've got any for Dr. Hoffman.
Yeah, and especially I saw one vote for feeling not at all familiar with how tree canopy is involved with health. I'm happy to clarify that if that wasn't clear. Or if that was just a mistake, I understand that as well. But that's what the kind
maybe
of majority...
maybe that was a past tense written question.
Oh yeah.
All right. Well, if we have any questions, Dr. Hoffman, thank you so much for this presentation.
Of course.
It is recorded, and I'm going to stop the recording now. But this will be posted